are ready to get started. I'm going to go back to page 10 just because we kind of ended that really fast on Friday. Please make sure you use your Wednesday wisely because we do have assignments due this Friday. So make sure we are testing on Friday. So please make sure you use that Wednesday wisely in addition to listening to our lecture. I think we have quizzes on Thursday. So please make sure you're keeping up with what's going on. So on page 10, we talked about deism, and deism is going to pop up quite a bit in the beginnings of our first couple of chapters, and then we won't probably mention it ever again, mostly because deism is really important to founding fathers. It's important to a part of the American Revolution, and then it slowly kind of dies off. For our purposes, it is important to note that it is Christianity. There's no discussion. These men are Christians, but the idea is how they view religion as part of their life. If you look at C3, influence Jefferson, Franklin, Washington, Thomas Paine, and this is what you need to look at. C4, not a wide-scale movement, popular along the groups of intellectuals. So these are intellectuals that are participating in this. So all of our founding fathers, all of our intellectuals, all of the people that were the movers and thinkers and writers of both the revolution and the new nation afterwards are going to be deists. And then it just kind of slowly fades away. On page 10 and 11, that big list of really important events and developments in colonial America toward democracy. Some of them more important than others, especially things like the House of Burgesses, the town hall meetings, Bacon's Rebellion, the Zenger case. Remember, that is about expression, freedom of the press. We'll get to Paxton Boys' salutary neglect. And please note on page 11, the Great Awakening is one of those events. Even though, again, this is billed as a religious movement, it is much deeper and much more important than just a singular religious movement. And most of the questions that you'll be asked about the Great Awakening have nothing really to do about religious events, other than that you need to know Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield, and that's about it. And then obviously on page 11, that the Enlightenment is really important as a movement that influenced early colonists way, way more than it influenced probably any other people in the world. And mostly because if we want to compare the Enlightenment that is happening in Paris and France at that time versus what's happening in the colonies, it has to do with the fact that the people in the colonies are literate, that they can read stuff versus what's going to happen and is happening in Paris with a country that doesn't have a high literacy rate. It's really important when we talk about ideas that the ideas filter down to people, and the only way that that happens is people can read. And it's one of the reasons why A, lots of countries have withheld education, or B, lots of countries ensure that their population is educated. It is an essential part of democracy. Education is an essential part of democracy. On page 11 at the bottom, again, those of you, what do I study? How am I supposed to know this stuff? If you take those questions for review and either A, mentally run through a list, which I know is the one that you would prefer, but doesn't always work best, go through those and see, can you answer those? To what extent had the American colonies developed a democratic society? So you should be able to list, yep, here's all the things that they did that were democratic. Nope, here's all the things that weren't. I think it's best to write stuff down, but if you just want to orally go over that in your head, that's a great way to study. Analyze the impact of the Great Awakening on American religion. How did that impact our religion? How did it change religion? One of the things that it's going to really do is split major religious institutions like Presbyterians, Baptists, and B, it's going to create a whole lot of other religions that don't necessarily have a hierarchy or a name that's attached with them. And then to what extent did each of these three regions, again, this is really important, of colonial America developed a unique and separate society, unique and separate. These three areas, New England, South, and Mid-Atlantic, are all going to develop uniquely different personalities. And you need to be able to discuss all of those, because we're going to hit back at these unique different societies when we get to 1860 and this thing called the Civil War. So if you're still struggling, like, I don't know how to study, answering these questions, get all topics on everything that you need to know, and how broadly you address those, how much time you spend on those, I think will have a direct implication on your test. Again, I always encourage writing things down, because that physical activity of moving your pen and writing and going in your head, all scientifically proven that it works very, very well. Okay? Any questions about this? As we now move to war. So, Chapter 6 is essentially about the French and Indian War, and that will be, again, what we'll be discussing tomorrow. I will hope, I think, to go through the PowerPoint on the French and Indian War that I have, and it does require you to write some things down in your notes that I don't have. I do that every now and then on purpose. So right now, in the early 1730s, Great Britain has a presence in North America. France has a presence in North America. Spain has a presence in North America. It is really important to know that Great Britain is going to hang around after the Revolutionary War. They don't leave. There's nothing in the Revolutionary War that says Great Britain get off North America. It's not really until the War of 1812, our second War of Independence, that Great Britain finally leaves. Again, it is really, really hard, I think, in this study of our history, since we know the outcome, to understand the implications were not always what it turned out to be. So, France is well established in North America. They are well established in Canada. They, as much like Great Britain, they were late coming into this colonial type of setting, because all they wanted to do was trade. So essentially, way after Jamestown and Massachusetts Bay Colony, France decides we probably should settle some people in these places, because we're going to lose everything if we don't actually have people. These trading posts are great, but we need some people. And so France will set up these places in French Canada, mostly for Huguenots. And this is a word that my AP Euro people should know. These are Protestants. These are French Protestants who have to get the heck out of France, because they are not allowed to worship in France. Things are going really bad for them in France. So they decide to head to Canada. The Edict of Nantes granted limited toleration to French Protestants. Religious wars had ceased, and so now France dominates Europe. So they're like, hey, let's head over to Canada and let's see what's there. They will establish Quebec, which Quebec is still very, very, very Francais. Probably about every 5 or 6 years, Quebec has a vote to try to secede from Canada and be its own little French-Canadian place, because Canada is now a commonwealth of the UK, because Great Britain beat France in some stuff. And so there's a little teeny tiny enclave of French Canadians. I know most of us always think that Canada is all French, but it's just a little teeny part in and around Quebec where they do still speak French. Some people speak it as their first language. But it is established a year after Jamestown by Samuel Champlain. Again, please look at B2, friendship with Huron Indians, enemies of the Iroquois, which will come in. But again, France goes into this making friends, right? Hey, Indians, we're here. We're going to make some friends with you guys. We're going to hang out. We're going to trade. We're going to make a colony. It's right here on this great big St. Lawrence River, which doesn't have the name St. Lawrence River yet, but we're on this big river. Their government, no popularly elected assembly, no tributury, because they don't have that in France either. And the French population is going to grow really slowly. It's not a place that is conducive to great population explosions. It's cold. It's really cold, colder than what they're used to in France, and harsh conditions in living there. So, they've got about 6,000 whites by 1750 compared with about 2 million in the 13 colonies. So that's a slow growth. France, again, isn't really about settling colonies. It's still about making money. So again, France is going to, as we move forward, expand. Of the European powers, the French were most successful in creating effective trading relationships. So what this is going to be about, this eventual war, is about the French protecting their trade. And it is very, very lucrative trade. French traders are making a considerable amount of money on these trades for pelts. So British settlers sought to remove or exterminate them. We've already got that. Spanish wants to Christianize them and enforce labor. See, the French became great gift givers, and that will be what they will be doing, is giving gifts. And these gifts monetarily don't amount to much. It's beads, glass beads, alcohol, fabric, guns, things that in no way are equal to the amount of money that these French fur trappers are going to make selling their furs in Europe. At the top of page 2, you do need to know what that is, and it's beaver. The beaver trade, again, is what makes most of the exploration of North America. And beaver pelt is highly desired because it's waterproof. And there are lots and lots of beaver. Although they pretty get close to extinction in a lot of these places because of the massive demand for these pelts in France. Heavily demanded European fashion. So it's a fashion statement, and it's also, again, a excellent fur because it repels water. The Jesuits, number 3, are Catholic missionaries who sought to convert American Indians and save them from the fur trappers. Again, they're going to be brutally, brutally killed by the American Indians. They hold up to torture very well, more respected, and this torture is like real torture. It's bad torture. It's really bad. French established posts in the Mississippi River. And again, this is for Indiana, where a lot of our Indiana cities are established: Terre Haute, Vincennes, and all along St. Louis, all along the Mississippi River, because this is the easy way to get those fur pelts out, is they just set on the banks of the river. Indians came to them. They did their trade, put them on flat keel boats down to New Orleans and then out. That's why controlling New Orleans was, again, really important. Sought to block Spanish expansion and fur and trading posts in Illinois, Vincennes, even though that says Illinois, it's Vincennes, in Indiana country. Large amounts of grain will also be sent down the Mississippi. All right, so we've got these 3 colonial superpowers in North America. At this point, all 3 of them have realized the great, vast resources that this territory, this country, this continent has, and all 3 want them. Regardless of what they originally came here for, Spanish to colonize and Christianize, France for fur, England to colonize, at this point, everyone is after those natural resources, and everyone's after control of North America. And chapter 6, I think the name of it is The Duel for North America. Everybody wants this place. And at this point, we have to think of North America as including Canada. So when we say North America, we're talking about the continental United States and modern day Canada. This whole giant place, all 3 of these people are highly desirable or highly desired, and they all three want it. All of them had started fighting in Europe. The 7 Years' War is fighting in that area. And there's going to be 4 wars that are going to lead up to this great big giant thing called the French and Indian War. You don't have to know all of these wars, but it is important for our purposes in how the colonists feel about this French and Indian War. So 4 wars between 1688 and 1763. I would at this point, because this is actually a date you need to know, mark 1763. 1763 really is the beginning of the American Revolution. 1763 ends the French and Indian War, but it is really the beginnings of a march toward revolution. Okay, so that date is really, really important, 1763. So we got King William's War, Queen Anne's War, and all of this, again, this fighting that's happening in Europe. Colonists are having a time period in the 13 colonies where no one is paying attention to them. The Treaty of Utrecht ends colonial wars for 3 decades. We're done fighting in Europe. In the American colonies, a generation of peace ensued, salutary neglect. So on page 2, other than the date of 1763, the only other thing that is crucially important is A1C, salutary neglect. This is a really important definition to understand. It is really important to understand how this will impact the colonies, and it's really important to understand how it moves the colonies toward revolution. So salutary neglect is this time period in which the focus of Britain is on Britain and Europe, not the colonies. And they've left the colonies alone to develop all of those things we saw on the other 2 pages from page 10 and 11, that giant long list. Town hall meetings, House of Burgesses, toleration acts, all of these things the colonists have done on their own without any interference or any interjection from Parliament or the King. They've just said, hey, do your thing over there. We're too busy. We can't worry about you right now. So without much interference from Great Britain, the colonies have flourished. They are wealthy. They are well run. They are protecting themselves. And again, as stated, they have the highest cost of living anywhere in the world. So I'm going to sidestep to that 1-pager. Those of you that haven't started that, the 1-pager is colonial identity. How did the colonists develop an identity that's separate from being British? This is really step 1, salutary neglect. Bless you. Somewhere on that 1-pager, that definition, salutary neglect, should be. Those of you that haven't done a 1-pager before, a 1-pager is pictures, short quotes, short vocab words that give you a full picture of what that word means, colonial identity. So images, doodles, anything that you can think of that's going to give you this idea of colonial identity. The date, 1763, should be on there somewhere as well. When I didn't change the 1-pager directions just because I was being super duper lazy and had 8 million things. So every time when we do it and it says the quote, we're just doing people or groups of people. So next time, it's not going to be George Washington. I don't know, maybe. But next time it'll be George Washington. Or the time after that, it will be Woodrow Wilson. Or the time after that, it will be suffragettes. So when you see that quote, just ignore the quote and put the person or the group of people that we're studying in that. Since we're doing the cheat sheets, that kind of takes the place. But we do need to know people. So that will be that. Helpful, I hope, in that 1-pager. So our Prime Minister, Mr. Walpole, believed that if the colonies were left alone to run their own affairs with minimal interference, they would produce more wealth and commerce. Commerce means business, and cause less trouble. and check mark plus, they did. A plus, 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 Mr. Walpole. We did that, and we did it very, very well. All the colonists needed from England was peace, protection, law and order. Send us some troops every now and then. That's all we need. But for the rest, leave us alone. We're doing great. We're doing fine. We're doing awesome. So we have these two wars at the beginning, King William's and Queen Anne's, which ends in 1763. We've got this big, giant time period of peace until we get to 1744. Then we're going to start the War of Austrian Succession. We are going to look at, in particular, New England again invaded New France. We're going to invade France, New France. We're going to get this town called Louisburg. I'm not going to keep it for long. And then we're going to get another peace treaty that ends that one. And then we're going to begin on page 3, French and Indian War. So first and foremost, because the College Board loves to ask you this, it is the French and Indian as allies. So the French and Indian are fighting together. The French and Indians are not fighting against each other. The French and Indians are fighting together against Great Britain and the colonists. So this is a weird named war. And I can guarantee you, if you have anything about the French and Indian War, they will talk about the French and Indian fighting each other. The French and Indians are allies, fighting against the colonists and the British Crown. Really, this is a war against France and Great Britain that just happens to take place in the colonies. That's how the colonists see that. And I would write that somewhere too, that the colonists see this as a war between France and Great Britain that just happens to take place in the colonies. And that's really important to the colonists. So before we step into the French and Indian War, let's take a look at what's happening in the colonies. If I am a yeoman farmer in Pennsylvania, I have my own land, I'm farming, I'm getting my crops to market, I am safe, my standard of living is high, I am not hungry, I am not cold, I am not poor, I am not sick, I have healthy children, my kids are going to school, my sons are someday going to go to college. I have a great life. I'm safe, secure, healthy, well-fed, everything's good for me. I don't have any problems in the world at this moment. I certainly don't have any problems that would cause me to fight somebody. That's where we're going to sit with a colonist. So, the French and Indian War is also known in other histories, not U.S. history, as a 7 Years' War. It is the most important of all of these colonial wars. And the main issue is the Ohio Valley. And that Ohio Valley is really the state, the western part of Pennsylvania and Ohio, anything that's in that area. And the reason being is like we will spend the first 100 years of our nation, we want to move west. We want to get over those Allegheny Mountains and move into this rich, fertile Ohio Valley with tons of timber, lots of great soil, but lots of Indians because we've pushed them to the other side. So British are pushing west. France is on the other side of those mountains. So France is hanging out in what is Canada, modern day Michigan, modern day Wisconsin, and Minnesota. That's where they're at. They're up in that part and pushing down. France needs to retain that link to Canada with the lower Mississippi Valley. So they need that. As much as when we started our restoration colonies, like why the British established those Carolina colonies was to feed their Caribbean islands, same thing that French need to do to their Caribbean islands, right? We need that's a much easier place and a much easier way to get to the Caribbeans, to float down the Mississippi River, Gulf of Mexico, boom, you're there, as opposed to crossing the Atlantic. Same difference. For the colonies, for the British in West Indies, Carolinas, down that coast of Florida, boom. Did that not make sense, Lexi? Okay, what part didn't you understand?
So they want to get their stuff down to, like, down through
France wants to get, so in the Caribbean islands, there's the French West Indies, the British West Indies. Everybody's got islands, and in those islands right now are all sugar plantations. They can't grow food. So traditionally, that food has to come across the Atlantic. It's much easier for the French, if they get to this, to control upper PI, Great Lakes, float down Ohio, Mississippi, Gulf of Mexico to those islands, right? I'm saying we, even though it's not really we, the colonists and the British would also like to control that Ohio River, Gulf of Mexico. Remember a couple of pages ago, I told you how important the Port of New Orleans is. Everybody wants to control the Port of New Orleans. It is essentially one of the most important ports that we have, other than probably Boston at this point. So we want to make sure the French aren't moving into Ohio. So we send this young lieutenant colonel named George Washington by the French governor to the forks of the Ohio River to prevent the French from building a fort there. And he fails absolutely miserably. He's defeated, almost shot, bullet hole goes through his coat, forced to surrender his entire command. But the French say, hey, we know you guys got a long way back. We're not going to let you go back in empty-handed in defeat. You can keep your guns. So in essence, Washington surrenders. They get to keep their guns. They march back, defeated. France has held on to their fort, and in effect, Washington triggers a world war, because the 7 Years' War is a global world war. So, and let's talk really quickly about, again, George Washington. A couple of things that are going to be really important when we talk about George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, especially when they're in the rooms with people. They are really tall. They're over 6 feet, like James Madison's 5'2". Both of them are also gingers. You got tall, red-headed men. They're from Virginia. If you've ever been to Virginia, North Carolina, lots of red-headed people. So many red-headed people. And obviously, when you're looking to pick people, especially things where you're looking to pick important things, tall people are always obviously stand out in a room, especially if you're tall and redheaded. So George Washington starts this world war, and what's going to happen, and this is where we're going to leave it, is British are going to retaliate. All right, so we got to get something back for this. We've just had to surrender. We've sent this whole mission out. It's failed miserably. So we're going to clamp down on Nova Scotia, again, heading up into Canada. Nova Scotia, those of you that have a mental map, here's our coast, here's Maine, and Canada has like all those little islands that kind of hang out, Newfoundland and all that. Nova Scotia is up there. So it's kind of easy for us to take because it's separate, but relocated 4,000 Nova Scotians throughout the continent, including Louisiana. And those French-speaking Acadians are now the descendants of modern-day Cajuns, which, again, in Louisiana. War is going to widen and widen and widen until we get to this thing called the Albany Congress, and we will stop. No, let's do Albany Congress. Let's do this page so that we get to the other page. Sorry. Okay, so Albany Congress. Albany is New York. So make sure that you know that. I never want to assume that you know that. Just like you should know that the capital of New York is Albany, not New York City. Albany, which is all the way on the other side of the state. It's considered upstate New York. Great Britain's Board of Trade. And again, we've got this Board of Trade overlooking all the trading that's going on in the colonies. Called the leaders from the colonies to meet in Albany to discuss the Indian problem and to meet with the Iroquois. The Iroquois will fight on both sides. They're going to fight with the British, they're going to fight with the English, and they're going to fight with whoever gives them the better stuff, which is where we get that very, very politically incorrect derogatory term called an Indian giver. An Indian giver throughout our history, and it is a very derogatory term. You should never use that term. But Indians very wisely said, I'll fight for you. What do you give me? Okay, thank you. I'll take that. And then the British come and they say, we need you to fight. Okay, what will you give us? Okay, I'll take that. And are seen, obviously, through the lenses of European eyes as not honoring treaties. They don't have treaties. They don't honor things. They fight against each other all the time. So none of that made sense to them. The Iroquois refused to commit themselves to the British. Nope, we're not going to commit. We're not going to do any of that. And again, here's why the Albany Congress, bless you, and the Albany Plan for Union are so important. It is the beginning of establishing colonial unity. Hint, hint, another thing that should be on your one-pager. These Albany Congress and Albany Plan for Union is one of the most important parts of this movement towards the a colonial identity. You're most asked about the Albany Plan of Union. Ben Franklin creates this plan for colonial home rule. This is, again, Ben Franklin, one of the most influential founding fathers that hardly ever gets mentioned because he's awesome. Ben Franklin created a plan for colonial home rule. Home rule means we rule ourselves. We should be able to rule ourselves. Right now, Great Britain is starting to see this rise, and they're like, oh, whoa, wait a sec. Take 2 steps back here, colonist. You don't get to rule yourself. That word home rule kind of perks up the ears of Parliament because that's what Ireland keeps saying. We want home rule. Nope, not letting you do the home rule thing. Adopted by delegates. This is, again, a very important part of this movement towards revolution and a new nation, that we get the idea that we have to have representatives, that we're going to elect delegates to go and represent each colony at this colonial plan for union. Individual colonies rejected it, said, nope, we don't like it, not enough independence. And Britain's going to reject it for too much independence. And here's a fun fact that you can throw out to people whenever you want to be historically accurate. So everyone, I hope, has seen, and sorry I don't have it pulled up, the flag with the snake chopped up into little pieces and it says join or die. Everybody thinks that's about the American Revolution. It is not about the American Revolution. It is about the Albany Plan for Union. Ben Franklin says if we don't join, we're going to die. If we don't join together to fight against this Indian threat, we're all going to die. I'll start my topic tomorrow with that flag so that you see it. All right, everybody okay? Do we have any questions?